Vault 386. Eleanor Lancaster never questioned the life she built. The routines, the whispered reassurances, the way her husband always knew just what to say. Until the night she found the receipt, a name she didn't recognize, a place she'd never been, a feeling she couldn't shake. Now, the cracks are forming, the shadows are shifting, and the deeper she digs, the more she begins to wonder. Was she ever really in control? Or has someone else been pulling the strings all along? Some doors aren't meant to be opened. Some secrets should have stayed buried. But it's too late now. She already has the key. Settle in, take a breath. Let the world fade away for a little while. What you're about to hear is more than just a story. It's a descent into the unknown, a place where secrets linger in the shadows and the truth is never quite what it seems. So find a quiet place, dim the lights, and listen closely, because once you open the door to Vault 386, there's no turning back. Chapter 1. The Facade Cracks. The house was silent, too silent. Eleanor stood at the kitchen island, her fingers tracing the cool marble as she stared at the receipt in her hand. La Lune. The name alone sent a prickle down her spine. She had never been there with Gregory. She hadn't even heard him mention it. Yet, here it was, neatly printed on cream-colored paper with his signature at the bottom. And beneath it, the name Cassandra, scrawled in delicate cursive, like a whisper meant to be ignored. Her chest tightened. She tried to reason with herself. Maybe it was a business dinner. Maybe it was nothing. But something inside her, something raw and unrelenting, whispered otherwise. Gregory had been different lately, distant in the way that turned a warm body cold. Conversations clipped, his smile never quite reaching his eyes. The kind of distance that wasn't just exhaustion or stress, but intentional. She had told herself it was in her head, that marriages went through phases, but now she wasn't so sure. She clutched the receipt tighter, her pulse a steady drumbeat against her ribs. 5 years ago, laughter spilled into the dimly lit apartment as Eleanor twirled barefoot across the hardwood floor, Gregory's hands steady on her waist. They had just returned from a terrible, overpriced dinner, their shared misery transforming into giddy amusement. He had kissed her then, breathless and full of promises, murmuring that they would always find joy no matter what. She had believed him. The study door creaked as Eleanor pushed it open. She had never thought twice about Gregory's office before. His world of numbers and strategy had been separate from hers. But tonight, she stepped inside, her heartbeat steady but heavy, like stepping into unfamiliar terrain. The room smelled of polished wood and expensive ink. Papers lay scattered across his desk, some stacked with an obsessive precision, others casually discarded. She hesitated before opening the top drawer. Inside were sleek black folders, embossed with his company's insignia. One caught her eye, Project Phoenix. She frowned, flipping it open. Financial records, transfers, unmarked expenses. It was all cryptic, yet methodical, and expensive. Numbers so large they felt abstract but wrong. She couldn't pinpoint why, but unease slithered up her spine. Then, something else. At the back of the drawer, wedged between documents. A key, small, rectangular, and unassuming, but something about it felt wrong. Before she could dwell on it, her phone buzzed. Lena. Eleanor exhaled. If there was anyone who could help her decipher this, it was Lena. A PI by profession, a friend by fate. She hesitated, but only for a second before answering. "You okay?" Lena's voice was sharp, the kind that didn't waste time on pleasantries. Eleanor's grip tightened on the phone. "I think Gregory's hiding something." A pause. Then, Lena's dry chuckle. Think? Eleanor, you don't call me unless you know. Her throat constricted. She glanced at the key, then at the receipt, still clenched in her fist. I need to know what I'm dealing with. Lena didn't hesitate. Then let's start digging. Gregory found her in the kitchen later, the receipt gone, her expression carefully neutral. Long night? He asked, setting his briefcase down. She nodded, watching him as he loosened his tie, his movements practiced. Easy. The air between them was thick with unspoken words. I feel like you've been distant, she said, testing him. He glanced at her, just for a second too long before offering a tired smile. You're imagining things, Eleanor. Her stomach twisted. The words were too smooth, too rehearsed. Outside, through the window, movement caught her eye. A woman in a red coat standing just across the street, watching. Cassandra. Eleanor's blood ran cold, and in her palm, the hidden key pressed against her skin like a promise. Chapter 2. The Key to Nowhere. Eleanor didn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, Gregory's even breaths beside her feeling more like an accusation than comfort. The key burned a hole in her mind, its silver edges digging into her palm hours after she'd tucked it away in her jewelry box, hidden among things Gregory never paid attention to. And then there was Cassandra, a woman who shouldn't be standing outside their home, a woman whose name shouldn't be on receipts from intimate restaurants. She turned onto her side, her eyes tracing the rigid line of Gregory's shoulders as he slept. You're imagining things, Eleanor. She wanted to believe him, but she didn't. By morning, she had a plan. Lena was already waiting for her at a cafe 2 blocks from Gregory's office, stirring her espresso with a deliberate slowness that signaled impatience. Dressed in her usual sharp blazer and fitted trousers, Lena always looked like she belonged in an interrogation room, whether as the investigator or the suspect depended on the day. Eleanor dropped into the seat across from her, setting her phone down between them. Lena raised a brow. You look like you spent the night solving a murder. Eleanor exhaled. I think I might be on the verge of one. That made Lena smile. Now we're talking. What do you have? Eleanor slid the receipt across the table. La Lune. Gregory was there last week. Lena didn't blink. With Cassandra. It wasn't a question. Eleanor nodded. And I found this. She held up a picture of the key she had snapped before leaving the house. Hidden in his desk. Lena's expression sharpened. You're sure he didn't mean for you to find it? Eleanor frowned. What do you mean? Lena leaned in. Men like Gregory. Powerful, careful. They don't leave things like this out unless they want to. Either he's testing you, or he's slipping. Either way, that key leads somewhere, and we need to find out where. Eleanor swallowed hard. I don't even know where to start. Lena smirked. Luckily, I do. Later that night. Gregory was working late. Again. Eleanor had stopped questioning it, stopped asking for explanations she no longer wanted to hear. Instead, she slipped into his study, locking the door behind her. She took a steadying breath. The desk was exactly as she had left it, neat, pristine. Except now she knew it was hiding something. She pulled the key from her pocket. It was small, delicate, not the kind that would open something obvious like a door or a safe. No, this was something else. A lockbox, a drawer, maybe even a safety deposit box. She ran her fingers along the edges of the desk, feeling for hidden compartments. Gregory wasn't careless, but he was arrogant. He believed in his own control too much. Her fingers brushed something beneath the bottom drawer, a small indentation. Her pulse quickened. Carefully, she pressed. A soft click. The panel slid open, revealing a hidden compartment no larger than a book. Inside there was a black leather folder thick with documents. She hesitated only for a second before pulling it out. The first thing she saw was a name: Cassandra Reynolds. Eleanor's heart pounded as she flipped the pages. Bank transfers, property listings, and a contract, one with Gregory's signature at the bottom. And then, in the middle of the folder, a single photograph. Cassandra, standing outside their house, the same way she had last night. Watching, waiting. Eleanor's breath hitched. Whatever this was, it had started long before she'd noticed. And if Cassandra had been watching her, then it meant one thing. Gregory knew, and he had been waiting for Eleanor to figure it out. Chapter 3: Smoke and Mirrors. Eleanor's hands trembled as she shoved the folder shut. The weight of it was suffocating, pressing against her ribs like a warning she was too late to heed. Cassandra Reynolds. The name stared back at her, mocking her ignorance. Gregory hadn't just met her for dinner. He hadn't just cheated. This was bigger. Her fingers curled tightly around the key. She needed to get out of the study before Gregory came home. She forced herself to slip the folder back into the hidden compartment, making sure every paper was exactly as it had been before she found it. Then, with careful movements, she pressed the panel shut until it clicked back into place. She turned off the light and left, locking the door behind her. Gregory's car wasn't in the driveway yet. She had time. Her first instinct was to call Lena, but something stopped her. She wasn't ready to say it out loud. Instead, she paced the living room, gripping her arms, trying to breathe through the suffocating realization that whatever was happening, Gregory had been planning it for far longer than she could have ever imagined. The front door unlocked. She barely had time to school her expression before Gregory stepped inside, rolling his shoulders as if he carried the weight of the world. His tie was loose, his suit jacket slung over his arm, the very image of a man exhausted from a long day at work. Eleanor swallowed hard. Liar. He leaned down, pressing a kiss to her cheek. She didn't flinch, but she felt her stomach twist at the contact. "You're still up?" His voice was smooth, practiced. "You looked exhausted this morning." She forced a soft smile. "Couldn't sleep." Gregory hummed in understanding as he loosened his tie further, walking toward the kitchen. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, taking a slow sip before glancing at her. "You've been tense lately." She shrugged. "Work has been stressful." His eyes lingered on her, sharp and assessing, as if searching for cracks. "You'd tell me if something was wrong, wouldn't you?" The weight of the folder, the key, Cassandra's name, it all felt like poison on her tongue. "Of course," she lied. Gregory smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Good. She wanted to scream. Instead, she walked over, gently placing her hand on his arm, playing the role of the trusting wife one last time. "You must be tired. Come to bed." His gaze flickered, something unreadable flashing through his expression before he nodded. "In a bit." She left him there, sipping his whiskey, phone face down on the counter. And as she climbed the stairs, she knew she had one chance to figure out what was happening before Gregory realized she was already 3 steps ahead. She needed to find where that key led, and she needed to do it before it was too late. The next day, Lena leaned back in her chair, flipping the key between her fingers. "A lockbox," she finally said. "Maybe a storage unit. Safety deposit box, if he's being real careful." Eleanor exhaled. "How do I find out which one?" Lena smirked. "You let me handle that." She stood, grabbing her coat. "Give me a few hours. If Gregory's hiding something, I'll find out exactly where." Eleanor nodded, her stomach coiling with nerves. Lena was the best at what she did. If there was a secret to uncover, she'd find it. But what terrified Eleanor wasn't if Gregory was hiding something. It was why. Because if Cassandra was in the middle of it, and Gregory had left just enough breadcrumbs for her to start digging, then maybe the real trap wasn't what he was hiding. Maybe it was letting her find it. Chapter 4. The Trap is Set. Eleanor sat in her car outside the bank, her fingers tapping against the steering wheel in a steady, anxious rhythm. Lena had come through. She always did. The key belongs to a safety deposit box at Wellington Private Bank, she had told Eleanor that morning, sliding a slip of paper across the table. Accounts in Gregory's name. But get this, the box was last accessed 3 days ago. Someone's keeping tabs on whatever's inside. Eleanor's throat had gone dry. 3 days ago, right around the time she found the receipt, which meant Gregory wasn't just hiding something, he was actively protecting it. Now, as she stared at the polished glass doors of the bank, a single question looped in her mind. Am I walking into a trap? She took a breath. She had to risk it. Stepping out of the car, she smoothed down the front of her blouse, lifting her chin before striding inside. The bank was quiet, the kind of exclusive place where security was subtle but ever present. A receptionist greeted her with a polite smile. "How can I assist you today?" Eleanor tightened her grip on the key inside her purse. "I need access to my husband's safety deposit box." The receptionist's smile didn't waver. "Of course. Do you have authorization?" She expected this. "My husband asked me to retrieve something for him," she lied smoothly. "He's traveling and couldn't make it in person, but I have the key." She pulled it out just enough for the woman to see. The receptionist hesitated, glancing at the computer screen. "I see the account is under Gregory Lancaster." A beat. "Would you mind waiting one moment? I just need to confirm something." Eleanor forced herself to remain still as the receptionist picked up the phone, speaking in hushed tones. Every muscle in her body tensed. A minute passed, then another. The woman finally set the phone down, offering an apologetic smile. "My apologies, Mrs. Lancaster, but I'm afraid the account holder placed a restriction on this box. He must be present for access." Eleanor's stomach dropped. Gregory had anticipated this. He had locked her out. She barely managed to keep her expression neutral. "Of course, I'll let him know." Turning on her heel, she walked out of the bank, her heart hammering. This was worse than she thought. He wasn't just hiding something. He knew she was looking. That night, Gregory came home late. Again. Eleanor sat curled on the couch, pretending to read, but her mind was miles away. The sound of his keys jingling as he set them down sent a sharp wave of unease through her. "Long day?" she asked, voice even. Gregory stretched, rolling his neck. "Exhausting." He poured himself a drink, studying her over the rim of his glass. "What about you?" She forced a small smile. "Uneventful." His gaze lingered a second too long. "Good," he murmured, setting his drink down. The silence stretched, thick, with the weight of what neither of them was saying. Then, his phone buzzed on the counter. Eleanor's eyes flicked to the screen. A single message. Unknown number. She was at the bank. A chill ran down her spine. Gregory picked up the phone, reading the message with a carefully blank expression. Then slowly he turned to face her. "You didn't go anywhere today, did you?" Eleanor held his gaze, willing her hands not to shake. "No," she lied. Gregory smiled, but in his eyes she saw the truth. He knew, and now she was caught in his web. Chapter 5. A Game of Masks. Eleanor barely slept. She lay in bed beside Gregory, her body stiff with the knowledge that he knew, and yet he hadn't confronted her. Why? The message had been clear. Someone was watching her. Someone had told him she was at the bank. Yet instead of demanding answers, Gregory had smiled, kissed her goodnight, and slid into bed as if nothing had changed, as if he was waiting for her to slip up first. By the time morning came, Eleanor had made her decision. If Gregory was playing a game, she would learn the rules, and then she would break them. She moved carefully that morning, keeping her routine the same. She made coffee, kissed Gregory on the cheek as he left, and waited until she was certain he was gone before calling Lena. The line clicked after the second ring. "What happened?" Lena's voice was sharp, already sensing trouble. "He knew," Eleanor whispered. "Someone told him I went to the bank." Lena cursed under her breath. "That's not good." No, it wasn't. Eleanor closed her eyes, gripping the phone tighter. "I don't know who's watching me, but I need to find out what's in that box before Gregory locks it away for good." A beat of silence. Then Lena exhaled. "All right, we do this my way now." Eleanor opened her mouth to ask what she meant, but Lena was already moving. "Meet me in an hour." Then the line went dead. 1 hour later, Lena's office was tucked in the back of a rundown brick building, a stark contrast to the polished high society world Eleanor had spent years living in. The inside, however, was organized chaos. Files stacked high, multiple monitors flickering with data, and a coffee cup that looked like it had been refilled at least 6 times. Lena sat at her desk, typing furiously before spinning her chair to face Eleanor. "I dug into Cassandra Reynolds." Eleanor's pulse jumped. "And?" Lena smirked. "She's not who you think she is." She handed over a file, and Eleanor hesitated before opening it. Inside were grainy surveillance photos, timestamps, and addresses. Cassandra standing outside their house. Cassandra at La Lune. Cassandra entering a sleek high-rise building downtown. "She's not just Gregory's mistress," Lena said, tapping one of the images. "She's connected to something bigger." Eleanor's blood ran cold. "Bigger how?" Lena pulled up another screen. "That building? It's owned by Phoenix Holdings." Eleanor froze. Project Phoenix. The name she had seen on Gregory's documents. "This isn't just an affair, Eleanor," Lena murmured. "Whatever Gregory is involved in, it's dangerous." Eleanor felt the walls closing in. The safety deposit box, the financial records, Cassandra's presence. It was all connected. And now, Eleanor was tangled in something she didn't understand. But one thing was clear. Gregory wasn't just hiding secrets. He was hiding Cassandra's secrets too. That night, Eleanor played her role perfectly. She smiled at dinner, nodded in all the right places as Gregory talked about work, pretended she wasn't unraveling inside, but her heart nearly stopped when he reached across the table, brushing a thumb over her wrist. "I've been thinking," he said smoothly, "we should take a trip, just the 2 of us." Eleanor swallowed. "A trip?" Gregory nodded. "You've been stressed lately. A change of scenery might be good for us." He was watching her too closely, his gaze too measured. This wasn't a gesture of love. This was a move. Eleanor forced a soft smile. "That sounds nice." Gregory lifted his wine glass, his expression unreadable. She lifted hers too, and as their glasses clinked together, a single thought pulsed through Eleanor's mind. "He's trying to get me away from the evidence." She had to act fast, before Gregory made his next move, before she lost control completely. Chapter 6. The Clock is Ticking. Eleanor stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, her heart hammering. Gregory's offer wasn't just an offer. It was a warning, a test. He was watching her, waiting for her reaction. If she refused, he'd know she was onto him. If she agreed, she'd be stuck, somewhere far away with a man who had every reason to keep her from asking more questions. She gripped the edge of the sink, breathing deeply. She needed to act, and she needed to act now. Her phone buzzed on the counter. A message from Lena. "Lena, meet me in 30 minutes. I found something." Eleanor didn't hesitate. Lena's office smelled like stale coffee and ink, but Eleanor barely noticed. Her friend was sitting behind her desk, scrolling through files, her sharp eyes narrowed in concentration. She didn't waste time. "Gregory's planning something," Eleanor said, the second she shut the door behind her. Lena glanced up. "What do you mean?" "He wants to take me on a trip." Lena's jaw tensed. "That's not good." "I know." Eleanor exhaled sharply. "I don't have time to figure out what's inside that safety deposit box. Not if I'm being watched. I need another way in." Lena smirked, already on it. She turned her monitor, and Eleanor's breath caught at what she saw. A floor plan, Wellington Private Bank. "You're not getting in as Gregory's wife," Lena said. "But you are getting in." Eleanor's mouth went dry. "How?" Lena leaned back, tapping a file on her desk. "Turns out Wellington has a habit of hiring private cleaning services for after-hours maintenance." Eleanor blinked. "You're suggesting I break into a bank?" Lena grinned. "You catch on quick." "This is insane." Eleanor ran a hand through her hair. "I'm not a criminal." Lena raised a brow. "Do you really think Gregory's playing fair?" The question hit hard. Eleanor looked down at the blueprints, the tiny security markers, the box number Lena had already marked. She had a choice. Let Gregory take control, or take control first. She lifted her chin. "I'm in." That night, Eleanor had never felt adrenaline like this. Dressed in a simple maintenance uniform, she walked through the back entrance of Wellington Private Bank. Her ID badge, carefully forged by Lena, clipped neatly to her chest. The key burned in her pocket. Every step she took felt deafening, but no one looked at her. She was just another worker, blending into the background. She reached the secure deposit box area, where a keypad stood between her and Gregory's secrets. Lena's voice crackled in her hidden earpiece. "Code's 4729. Eleanor punched in the numbers. The door clicked open. She moved quickly, heart pounding, slotting the key into box 386 and turning it. The lid popped open. Inside was a single black leather folder. Eleanor grabbed it, flipping it open, and the air in her lungs disappeared. Inside were dozens of photographs of her, walking into Lena's office, reading in the park, standing at the window of her own home. Some were from years ago. Beneath them, a contract. She skimmed the words, hands shaking. It wasn't a business deal. It was a surveillance order, signed by Gregory Lancaster. And at the bottom, a single name listed as the primary subject, Eleanor Lancaster. She staggered back, horror crawling up her spine. This wasn't about Cassandra. It was about her. Gregory hadn't just been hiding secrets. She was the secret, and whatever was happening, whatever Project Phoenix was, she was right in the middle of it, and she had no idea why. Chapter 7. The Truth Beneath the Surface. Eleanor's breath came in short, sharp bursts as she stared at the surveillance order. Her name, Gregory's signature, years of watching her. This wasn't about an affair. It wasn't about Cassandra. It was about her. She shoved the papers back into the folder, her mind racing. She needed to get out. Now. Lena's voice crackled in her earpiece. "Eleanor, you've been in there too long. What's happening?" Eleanor forced herself to move, clutching the folder tight as she turned back to the vault door. I found something, she whispered. It's worse than we thought. Talk later. Move now. She stepped back into the corridor, walking as calmly as she could despite the adrenaline flooding her veins. Just a few more steps. A shadow moved. Eleanor barely had time to register the shift before a security guard rounded the corner. Her stomach dropped. The man's gaze flicked to her uniform, then to the folder in her hands. You're not supposed to be back here. Think, Eleanor, think. She forced a nervous laugh, adjusting her grip on the folder. Sorry, wrong room. First day, you know how it is. The guard didn't smile. Her heart pounded. Then Lena's voice in her ear, sharp and quick. Exit left. Now. Eleanor didn't hesitate. She turned on her heel, forcing herself to walk, not run, down the hall. She expected the guard to call after her, but he didn't. He just watched, waiting. It sent ice down her spine. By the time she made it out of the bank's side exit and into the alley, she was shaking. Lena's car screeched to a stop beside her. Get in. Eleanor barely shut the door before Lena peeled away from the curb, tires screeching. Talk, Lena demanded, eyes locked on the road. Eleanor shoved the folder into her lap, flipping it open. Gregory's been watching me for years. He has files, photos. Why the hell would he need to track his own wife? Lena cursed under her breath. This isn't just about you. It's bigger. Eleanor's fingers tightened on the edge of the folder. Project Phoenix. Lena shot her a look. What? That was on the documents in Gregory's study, and Cassandra, she's connected to it. Lena exhaled. Then we need to find her, fast. Eleanor nodded, but deep down dread curled in her stomach. Because Gregory already knew she was looking, and now he'd know she had this file, which meant the game wasn't just about keeping secrets anymore. It was about who would survive knowing them. That night, Eleanor barely made it home before Gregory. She rushed to put the folder in a place he would never check, inside a zipped compartment of one of her old suitcases, buried deep in the back of her closet. Then she changed into her nightgown, washed her face, and forced herself to look normal. Minutes later, the front door opened. She turned, heart pounding, as Gregory stepped inside. His eyes found hers instantly. You're still up, Eleanor smiled. Couldn't sleep. Gregory studied her for a moment. Then, too casually, he said, You went out today. She felt the blood drain from her face. Keep it together. She forced a chuckle. Groceries. Why? Gregory didn't blink. No reason. A pause. Then he smiled. Go to bed, darling. She did. But as she lay there, staring at the ceiling, one thought gnawed at her. Gregory wasn't fooled. He knew. And whatever came next, she wasn't ready for it. Chapter 8. The Cage Tightens. Eleanor woke to the sound of her phone vibrating against the nightstand. Her body was stiff, her mind clouded from restless sleep. She blinked at the screen. Lena. A quick glance at the clock. 4:12 a.m. Dread pooled in her stomach. She slipped out of bed carefully, glancing at Gregory's sleeping form. His breathing was deep, steady. Still, she took the phone and padded silently into the bathroom, locking the door behind her before answering. Tell me you didn't get caught, Lena said, her voice low and urgent. Eleanor swallowed. Not yet. That's not good enough. We have a problem. Her grip on the phone tightened. What happened? Lena's exhale was sharp. I ran a deeper search on Cassandra. She disappeared 3 weeks ago. Eleanor's blood ran cold. What? She hasn't been seen at her usual spots. No bank transactions, nothing. If she's alive, she's gone underground. Eleanor's pulse hammered. You think Gregory? I think she got too close to something. A pause. Then Lena's voice turned grim. Just like you. Eleanor closed her eyes, pressing her back against the bathroom wall. 3 weeks. That was right around the time Gregory started pulling away. If Cassandra had been watching Eleanor, it meant she had known something that made her a threat, and now she was gone. Eleanor whispered, if she knew something, she left something behind. That's what I'm betting on. Eleanor forced a breath. Where do we start? Lena hesitated. I already started. A sinking feeling curled in Eleanor's gut. Lena, I found her apartment address. Meet me in an hour. Eleanor's pulse spiked. That's dangerous? Lena cut in. No shit, but sitting on your hands is more dangerous. She wasn't wrong. Eleanor glanced at the door, then at her reflection in the mirror. If Gregory suspected her, if she was already being watched, this was her only shot. She clenched her jaw. I'll be there. Cassandra's apartment. The building was older, the kind of place people lived in when they didn't want to be found. Lena was already waiting when Eleanor arrived, leaning against her car, arms crossed. You took your time, she muttered. I had to make sure I wasn't followed. Lena gave a short nod. Smart. She gestured to the door. I pulled some strings. We've got 20 minutes before anyone asks questions. Eleanor's hands were cold as they entered the apartment. It was eerily untouched. No signs of a struggle, no forced entry, just emptiness. A layer of dust coated the kitchen counters. Unopened mail sat neatly stacked on the table. Cassandra had left in a hurry, or she had never meant to return. Eleanor moved carefully, scanning the apartment for anything. A clue, a hidden message. Lena checked the bedroom, while Eleanor stopped at the desk in the corner. The drawers were empty, except for one, a single manila envelope tucked inside. Her hands trembled as she pulled it out. Inside were photographs of Gregory, meeting with men in dark suits, signing papers, speaking with someone just out of frame, and then one final photograph of Eleanor. She felt the air rush from her lungs. She was sitting in a cafe, alone, but someone had been watching her. A message was scribbled on the back of the photo in looping cursive. If you're reading this, you're already in danger. Don't trust anyone. Eleanor's grip tightened. Lena leaned over her shoulder. That her handwriting? Eleanor nodded numbly. Lena exhaled. Then we need to move. Now. Eleanor barely had time to react before Lena grabbed the envelope and stuffed it under her jacket. Then, from the hallway, footsteps. They froze, a soft creak of the floorboards. Someone was outside the apartment door. Eleanor's stomach clenched. Lena met her gaze. Time to go. They slipped out the back exit, moving quickly, not running, but close. As they rounded the corner, Eleanor risked one final glance back. A figure stood in the apartment hallway, watching them. A tall, familiar figure. Gregory. He knew. And now, the hunt had begun. Chapter 9. The Hunt Begins. Eleanor's breath came in shallow bursts as she and Lena slipped into the car. Gregory had been there, watching. Had he followed her? Had he expected her to come? Or had she simply walked straight into his web? Lena threw the car into drive, tires screeching as they sped away from Cassandra's apartment. That was close. Eleanor clenched her fist to stop her hands from shaking. He was there. Lena's grip tightened on the wheel. Yeah, I saw. A beat of silence, the weight of it suffocating. Eleanor swallowed hard. What do we do now? Lena's jaw tensed. We stop reacting. We start planning. An hour later, Lena's safe house. The apartment was small, tucked away in a part of the city Eleanor never visited. A perfect hideout. Lena locked the door behind them before pulling the manila envelope from her jacket and dumping the contents onto the kitchen table. Eleanor sat down, forcing herself to look. The photos, the documents, the note Cassandra had left. She traced the writing with her fingertip, her pulse unsteady. If you're reading this, you're already in danger. Don't trust anyone. Lena paced. This doesn't tell us enough. We need to find out what she knew. Eleanor rubbed her temples. She was watching Gregory. She had to know something about Project Phoenix. Lena nodded. And now she's gone. Eleanor inhaled sharply. Because she got too close. Lena didn't respond. They both knew the truth. Whatever Cassandra had uncovered had gotten her killed. And now, Eleanor was next. That night, the Lancaster estate. Eleanor stepped through the front door, her pulse steady but her mind spinning. Gregory was home. She could hear him in his study, the soft clink of ice against glass, the low murmur of his voice on the phone. She moved carefully, slipping off her heels, schooling her features into something neutral, untouched, unbothered. But her hands were still cold. She was halfway up the stairs when his voice stopped her. Eleanor. She froze. Slowly she turned, keeping her expression calm. Gregory stood in the doorway of his study, leaning casually against the frame. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, his tie loosened just enough to give the impression of ease. But his eyes were razor sharp. "Where were you today?" Eleanor tilted her head, forcing a soft laugh. "Out, shopping. Why?" He hummed, taking a slow sip of his drink. "No reason. Just wondering why you left your car downtown." Her stomach flipped. He had followed her, tracked her. She smiled, smooth as silk. "I took a walk." Gregory didn't blink, didn't look away. She felt it, the weight of his knowing. He knew she was lying, and she knew he knew. The air between them shifted, charged, dangerous. Finally, he smiled. "You should get some rest." Eleanor exhaled through her nose. "I will." She turned and walked up the stairs, her heartbeat roaring in her ears. This was a game now, a game of control, and the only way to win was to outplay him. Midnight. Eleanor's study. She locked the door behind her, fingers shaking as she pulled out her phone. A message from Lena. "Lena, I found something. Call me." Eleanor didn't hesitate. Lena picked up on the first ring. "You were right. Cassandra left something behind." Eleanor's grip tightened. "What?" Lena's voice was clipped. "A storage unit, paid for under an alias. It's still active." Eleanor's pulse spiked. "Where?" Lena hesitated. "That's the problem. It's in Gregory's name." Eleanor's breath caught. Gregory knew about the storage unit. He had access to whatever Cassandra had hidden. And if he hadn't gotten rid of it yet, it meant one thing. He was using it. Her blood ran cold. Lena's voice was grim. "We need to get to it before he does." Eleanor swallowed hard, her mind already racing. If she wanted answers, real answers, this was it, the final piece of the puzzle, and it was locked inside a place only Gregory was supposed to have access to. She met her own reflection in the dark window, her eyes steady. If this was the only way to find out the truth, so be it. It was time to break in. Chapter 10. Breaking In. Eleanor sat in Lena's car, staring at the cold, lifeless rows of metal storage units stretching under the dim glow of streetlights. The industrial complex was nearly deserted at this hour, just past midnight, with only the occasional flicker of a motion-activated light. Her heart pounded against her ribs. Gregory's name was on the lease, which meant he had been here. He had access. He knew this place. And if he knew, she exhaled. "We have to be fast." Lena tapped the steering wheel, her voice low. "You ready?" Eleanor tightened her grip on the folder in her lap. Cassandra's photos, surveillance order, the proof that her husband had been watching her for years. She wasn't ready, but she was going in anyway. "Let's do this." Lena nodded once, grabbing a small black bag from the back seat. "I scouted earlier. No security cameras, just a gate code for after-hours access. Luckily, Gregory loves his patterns." She pulled out a piece of paper, scribbled with numbers. Eleanor's brows furrowed. "You figured out his code?" Lena smirked. "Men like him always reuse things. I ran variations of his old office codes, and surprise, one worked." Eleanor exhaled. "And the lock?" Lena patted the bag. "Let's just say I have a universal key." Adrenaline burned through Eleanor's veins as they stepped out of the car. The air was crisp, carrying the faint metallic scent of rain on concrete. Lena led the way, moving with practiced efficiency toward Unit B16, Gregory's. The metal door loomed in front of them. Eleanor's fingers tingled. Whatever's inside, it was important enough for Cassandra to hide, important enough for Gregory to keep, important enough to kill for. Lena crouched by the lock, pulling out a small tool kit. The soft click-click of metal scraping against metal filled the air as she worked. Eleanor kept watch, her body thrumming with nervous energy. Seconds passed. Then, a soft pop. Lena stood, rolling her shoulders. "We're in." Eleanor swallowed. "Okay." She reached for the handle, forcing herself to breathe, and slid the door up. Inside the storage unit. At first glance, it didn't seem like much. No money, no weapons, no obvious signs of something sinister. Just a few stacked boxes, a single metal filing cabinet, and, oddly, a chair, as if someone had sat here, waited here. Eleanor hesitated before stepping inside, the dim light from the overhead fixture casting eerie shadows on the walls. Lena immediately went for the filing cabinet, yanking open the top drawer. "We don't have long. Let's grab what we can." Eleanor moved to the boxes, flipping one open. Her breath caught. Inside were dozens of audio tapes, labeled, dated. Her hands trembled as she ran her fingers over them, scanning the names. Eleanor, Home Office, March 12th. Eleanor Park, May 7th. Eleanor and Gregory, Private Conversation, August 4th. She jerked back, as if burned. Recordings. Gregory had recordings of her conversations, her movements. Lena cursed under her breath. "This is bad." Eleanor felt lightheaded. "He's been recording me." Lena grabbed a handful of tapes, shoving them into her bag. "Take what you can. We need to listen to these." Eleanor forced herself to keep moving, her hands shaking as she dug deeper into the boxes. Then, her fingers brushed against something cold, a USB drive. She pulled it out, heart hammering. "This has to have everything." Lena looked up. "Then we're taking it." Eleanor barely had time to react before the motion light outside the unit flickered on. Her stomach dropped. Footsteps. Lena's eyes flashed. "Someone's here." Eleanor's pulse went wild. Gregory. Had he followed them? Lena moved fast, yanking the metal door down, sealing them inside. They were trapped. Eleanor clenched the USB in her fist, pressing against the cold wall as the footsteps stopped just outside. A shadow shifted beneath the door. A long pause. Then a slow, deliberate knock. Tap, tap, tap. Eleanor's breath froze in her throat. Lena pressed a finger to her lips, motioning for Eleanor to stay silent. Another beat of silence, then the sound of retreating footsteps. A car door slamming, an engine roaring to life. Eleanor's chest heaved as the vehicle peeled away, the sound fading into the distance. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Lena exhaled, unlocking the door and pushing it open an inch to check outside. Clear. Eleanor stumbled out, lungs burning, her hands clutching the stolen evidence like a lifeline. Lena turned to her, face set with determination. "We're running out of time." Eleanor met her gaze, her mind racing. Gregory had been tracking her for years. Cassandra had been onto something, and now they had proof. She stared at the USB in her palm, her heartbeat steadying. It was time to find out the truth, and once she did, Gregory Lancaster would never see it. Chapter 11. The Files That Change Everything. Eleanor sat in Lena's apartment, staring at the USB drive clenched in her palm. This small, unassuming object could hold the answers. The truth Gregory had spent years hiding, but the weight of it terrified her. Lena moved with purpose, setting up her laptop, inserting the USB. The screen flickered to life. A single folder. Project Phoenix. Eleanor's throat tightened. "Open it." Lena didn't hesitate. Inside were video files, audio recordings, a document labeled Phase 2, Approval Pending. Lena clicked on the first video file. The screen filled with grainy security footage, a conference room, Gregory at the head of a table, 4 other men. A timestamp, 3 months ago. Gregory's voice came through, cold and clinical. "Eleanor is the final subject. We move forward with monitoring." Her blood ran ice cold. One of the men leaned forward. "And the control phase?" Gregory's expression didn't change. "We condition her further. She's already begun doubting herself. The next step is full submission." The room spun around Eleanor. Conditioning? Submission? What the hell was he talking about? The second video began. A different location. A medical lab. She saw herself, strapped to a hospital bed, eyes fluttering, unconscious. Eleanor's breath stopped. She barely recognized herself, but there she was, hooked to machines, IVs in her arm. Gregory stood beside her, speaking to a doctor. "Increase the dosage. She needs to be compliant." Eleanor staggered back, nausea rising. "No," her voice cracked. "This isn't real." Lena's face was pale. "Eleanor." She shook her head violently. "No, I would remember. I would know." But she didn't. She didn't remember any of it. The medical records came next. They listed dates, procedures, sedation logs. Gregory had been drugging her, manipulating her mind for years. Her stomach dropped, the headaches, the dizziness, the memory lapses. She had dismissed them as stress, as overthinking, but they weren't. They were by design. Lena's voice was tight. "This isn't just tracking, Eleanor. He's been controlling you." Eleanor's vision blurred. Every moment she had doubted herself, every time Gregory had told her she was imagining things, every instant she had brushed away the feeling that something was wrong. Gregory had done this to her, her hands clenched into fists. The final file was an audio recording. Lena clicked it, and Gregory's voice filled the room. "Once she's fully compliant, we initiate Phase 3. If she resists, we move to termination." Eleanor's blood went cold. Termination. The room was dead silent. Then Lena whispered, "He's planning to kill you." The world snapped into focus. Everything Gregory had done, his gaslighting, his watching, his control, it had all been leading to this. Eleanor wasn't just someone he was manipulating. She was a test subject, and she had just found out too much. Lena closed the laptop, her jaw set. "We need to go. Now." Eleanor shook with adrenaline, her mind spiraling. Gregory wanted her gone, but he didn't know she knew, and that gave her one last advantage. She lifted her chin, her heartbeat steadying. "No," she said. Lena frowned. "No?" Eleanor's eyes darkened. "We're not running." Her fingers curled around the USB, her voice steady as steel. "We're going to destroy him." Chapter 12. the beginning of the end. Eleanor's heart pounded as the weight of her decision settled over her. She wasn't running. She was fighting back. Lena studied her for a long moment, then nodded. All right, but if we're doing this, we do it smart. No reckless moves. Eleanor clenched the USB drive in her fist. Gregory doesn't know I've seen this yet. That's our advantage. Lena smirked. Then let's make it count. She turned back to her laptop, fingers flying across the keys. We need a strategy. First, we leak this. Not just the financials, not just the surveillance logs, everything. But we do it right. If Gregory is as powerful as he thinks he is, he'll bury any random accusation. Eleanor nodded. We need undeniable proof. Something public. Something that makes people listen before he can spin it. Lena pulled up a list of contacts. I know a few reporters who specialize in corporate scandals. They'll run with this if we give them the right push. Eleanor exhaled. And Cassandra. If she's still alive, we need to find her before Gregory does. Lena's eyes darkened. I have a lead on that, too. Eleanor's pulse spiked. You do? Lena nodded, flipping her phone around. A burner email sat open on the screen. Unknown sender. She was right about Project Phoenix. He won't stop until it's finished. Don't trust anyone. I'll contact you again. Eleanor's breath hitched. Sent an hour ago, Lena murmured. No name, no location. But if I had to guess, Eleanor whispered, Cassandra. Lena nodded. She's in hiding. A slow realization settled over Eleanor. Cassandra had known this would happen, and now she was watching them too. Eleanor tightened her grip on the table. Then we need to force Gregory's hand before he finds her first. Lena smirked. I was hoping you'd say that. She cracked her knuckles, pulling up a secured data server. Time to burn Gregory Lancaster's empire to the ground. That night, the Lancaster estate. Eleanor stepped through the front door, her nerves humming beneath her skin. Gregory was waiting for her in the study, as if he knew she was coming. He was sitting behind his desk, sipping whiskey, watching her with that same unreadable expression. You're home late, he murmured. Eleanor smiled. Shopping. His gaze flickered, subtle, but she saw it. He was testing her. She walked to the bar cart, pouring herself a drink, forcing her hands to stay steady. Gregory leaned back in his chair, studying her like a puzzle he was trying to solve. You've been restless lately, he said casually. Eleanor met his gaze, voice even. Have I? A slow smile curled his lips. You know you can tell me anything, don't you? Her chest tightened, the gas lighting, the control, the monster sitting across from her, pretending to be her husband. Eleanor took a slow sip of her drink, letting the silence stretch. Then she set the glass down, stepping closer, forcing herself to smile. Of course, she whispered. I trust you completely. Gregory's smirk widened. But for the first time, Eleanor was lying. And this time he didn't know it. The game had changed. And soon, Gregory Lancaster was going to lose everything. Chapter 13. The Setup. Eleanor played her role perfectly. For the next 24 hours, she smiled at Gregory, kissed him when expected, responded to his casual conversations as if everything was normal, as if she wasn't plotting his downfall. But inside she was coiling like a spring, waiting for the right moment to strike. Lena worked in the background, moving pieces Eleanor didn't even know existed. The files were already backed up in 3 secure locations: the financial records, surveillance orders, and medical documents, all undeniable proof of Gregory's crimes, were set to be leaked the moment he realized she wasn't under his control anymore. The only thing left was timing, and Gregory, he was watching her. She could feel it in the way his gaze lingered just a second too long, the way he casually asked about her day, as if he were testing her responses. He knew something was off, but he didn't know what, yet. The next morning, the first strike. Eleanor sat in her car outside Veritas News, her pulse steady. This was the first move. Gregory controlled the media he could buy, but investigative reporters, those who prided themselves on exposing corruption, he couldn't touch them without making it obvious. Lena had already arranged the meeting. Inside, she was led to a private conference room. The journalist, Nina Patel, a woman with a reputation for taking down men far more powerful than Gregory, sat across from her, dark eyes sharp with interest. "You have my attention," Nina said, tapping her pen. Eleanor took a breath. Then she slid the USB drive across the table. "This will end my husband's career," she said quietly. "Maybe his life." Nina picked up the drive, turning it between her fingers. "And you're ready for that?" Eleanor met her gaze unflinching. "I'm counting on it." That night, Gregory moves first. Eleanor wasn't surprised when Gregory's assistant called to let her know he had arranged a private dinner for the two of them. She expected it. Gregory never confronted a problem head-on. He liked control, and that meant he would try to corner her before she could move first. But he was already too late. She dressed in a simple black gown, something elegant but understated, the perfect image of the devoted, loving wife. When she arrived at the restaurant, Gregory was already there, waiting at a secluded table in the back. The moment she sat down, she knew this wasn't a dinner. It was a warning. Gregory leaned back, studying her, fingers tapping against his glass. "You've been different lately," he said casually. Eleanor took a sip of wine, giving him an innocent look. "Have I?" A slow smirk curled his lips. "You have." A pause. Then, "Where were you yesterday?" The question was so soft, so casual, but Eleanor felt the trap beneath it. She tilted her head, smiling. "Running errands." Gregory's fingers stopped tapping. The silence stretched, thick and unyielding. Then slowly he exhaled. "You know, don't you?" Eleanor's blood ran cold. She kept her face neutral, but inside alarm bells were screaming. Gregory wasn't asking if she suspected something. He was asking if she knew. She smiled, leaning forward just enough to let her fingers brush the rim of her glass. "I don't know what you mean," she whispered. Gregory's smirk widened, but his eyes didn't match. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a small object. He set it on the table between them. A USB drive. Eleanor's stomach twisted. It was her USB, the one she had given Nina. Her pulse roared in her ears. Gregory leaned in, voice silky smooth. "Try again, darling." Her breath caught. He knew. And now, the real game had begun. Chapter 14. The Countermove. Eleanor's mind was a razor's edge. Gregory had the USB, her USB, which meant he knew everything. But how? Had Nina betrayed her? Had Gregory intercepted it before she could release the files? Had he always been one step ahead? She swallowed down the panic clawing at her chest. This wasn't over. This was just the beginning. She let her gaze flicker to the USB between them before meeting Gregory's eyes. Calm, steady, controlled. "You went through my things?" she asked, tilting her head, voice light. Gregory chuckled, sipping his whiskey like this was just another conversation. "I don't need to. You're predictable, Eleanor." Her stomach twisted, but she didn't blink. She reached for her wine glass, taking a slow sip, keeping her expression unreadable. "And yet, you're the one who felt the need to test me." His smirk barely faltered, but she saw it. A flicker of something underneath. doubt. Good. She was still in this. Eleanor set her glass down, leaning back. So, tell me, what do you think I know? Gregory studied her, his fingers tapping against the table in slow, measured beats. Then he sighed, almost disappointed. You shouldn't have gone looking, Eleanor. A chill raced down her spine. Not you shouldn't have found anything. Not this is a misunderstanding. You shouldn't have gone looking. Eleanor forced a soft laugh. You act like I dug up some deep secret. She gestured to the USB, but all I did was hand off an empty drive to test you, and you fell for it. Gregory's fingers stopped tapping. Silence. A full second. 2. Then he laughed, low, amused, dangerous. Eleanor's pulse hammered, but she held firm, because in that moment she knew the truth. He didn't know how much she had seen. He had the USB, yes, but that wasn't her only copy. Lena still had the original files, and if Gregory was here watching her, it meant he hadn't found Lena yet, which meant Eleanor still had a chance. Gregory exhaled, shaking his head. Always playing your little mind games, she smiled. I learn from the best. Another beat of silence. Then Gregory reached for the USB, slipping it back into his pocket. You should stop, he said softly, before this gets ugly. Eleanor's stomach clenched. A threat, a direct warning. She lifted her chin, voice steady. What if I don't? Gregory smiled, but this time there was no warmth. Then, my love, he murmured, I'll have to remind you why you never had a choice to begin with. Lena's safe house. The emergency plan. Eleanor slammed the door behind her, shaking. Lena was already on her feet. What happened? Eleanor ran a hand through her hair, pacing. He has the USB. He knows I've been digging. Lena's face darkened. How? I don't know, but I bought us time. She turned, eyes sharp. Do you still have the files? Lena scoffed. Of course I do. Relief flooded through Eleanor. Then Lena grabbed her shoulders. Eleanor, if he has the USB, that means he's cutting off your escape routes. He's going to lock everything down. Eleanor swallowed hard. I know. Lena's grip tightened. Then we release it now. Eleanor hesitated, not because she was afraid, because she knew what this meant. Once they leaked the files, there was no undoing it. Gregory would know. He would come for her. But if she waited, he would silence her first. She met Lena's gaze. Do it. Lena's fingers flew across the keyboard, uploading everything to a secure whistleblower site. Financials, medical documents, surveillance records, all of it. Then, Lena turned the screen to Eleanor. One final button. A single click would send the files to every major news outlet in the country. A long pause. Then, Eleanor pressed it. The next morning. The fallout begins. Eleanor sat in her car, parked outside their home, watching the chaos unfold. The news had broken overnight. Screens everywhere showed Gregory's face. Corporate tycoon, Gregory Lancaster, implicated in illegal human experimentation scandal. The anchors were talking about her, about the victim, her hands tightened around the wheel. The world now knew part of the truth. But Gregory? He wasn't in custody, not yet. Because men like him, they didn't go down without a fight. And Eleanor knew, with bone-deep certainty, Gregory wasn't running. He was coming for her. And the next move would be the deadliest one yet. Chapter 15. The Reckoning. Eleanor stepped through the front door, pulse steady but mind racing. The house was silent, too silent. She had expected chaos, Gregory's rage, his lawyers scrambling, the sound of him throwing things, breaking things. But there was nothing, which meant He was waiting. She shut the door behind her, fingers brushing against the small knife she had tucked into her sleeve. She wasn't stupid. She knew Gregory would fight back, but she was ready. Her heels echoed against the marble floor as she moved toward his study. The door was open. Gregory stood inside, calm, hands tucked into his pockets as he stared at the screen on the wall, news anchors dissecting his fall in real time. They knew. The whole world knew, and yet he wasn't afraid. He turned as she entered, slow, deliberate. "Eleanor," he murmured, "what have you done?" She forced herself to hold his gaze, chin lifting. "I ended you." A long, stretching pause. Then Gregory exhaled, shaking his head, almost amused. "You really think this is over?" His voice was soft, dangerous. Eleanor clenched her fists. "The world knows what you are. It's only a matter of time before they arrest you." Gregory smirked. "You think men like me go to prison?" The words sent a sharp chill down her spine, because he wasn't afraid. Not yet. Eleanor's stomach twisted, but she didn't let it show. "Your empire is falling, Gregory. There's nothing left for you." He let out a soft chuckle, stepping closer. "You don't get it, do you?" he murmured, tilting his head. "You think you won, that you were the hunter." His gaze darkened. "You were always the experiment." The words hit like a bullet. She knew the files, knew the truth, but hearing it from him. Gregory leaned in, voice silken steel. "Tell me, Eleanor, do you remember how we met?" Her stomach clenched. Of course she did. The charity gala, the champagne, the way he had watched her before making his move. Gregory's smirk widened. "You never questioned it, did you? How easy it was. How I just happened to be the perfect man at the perfect time." Her breath hitched. No, he couldn't mean. His fingers brushed her chin, tilting her face just enough to make her look at him. "You weren't the wife, Eleanor," he whispered. "You were the project." The room spun. The conditioning, the memory gaps, the way he had always known what to say to make her doubt herself. It hadn't started after their marriage. It had started before. Gregory had been playing her from the beginning. Eleanor staggered back, heart slamming against her ribs. "You're lying." Gregory's smirk didn't waver. "I don't have to." The breath in her lungs turned shallow. Had her life ever been hers? Or had Gregory designed every moment, every choice, to keep her exactly where he wanted her? Her fingers curled around the knife in her sleeve, hidden, unseen. Gregory's voice softened, almost pitying. "You can't undo what's been done, Eleanor." Her grip tightened. He thought he still owned her. He thought he could break her, but he had already lost. Eleanor forced a slow breath, steadying herself. She wouldn't run. Not anymore. Her fingers twitched. Then, fast as lightning, she moved. The knife slashed through the air, aimed for his throat. But Gregory was ready. He caught her wrist, twisting just enough to make her stumble, but not enough to disarm her. His smirk flickered. "Finally showing your claws." Eleanor bared her teeth. "I should have done this years ago." She struck again. This time she aimed low, twisting the knife toward his ribs. But Gregory was too fast. He blocked, using brute strength to slam her against the desk. Pain shot up her spine, but she refused to let go of the blade. Gregory's eyes darkened. "You were always predictable." Eleanor smiled. "So are you." Then, she yanked a second blade from her waistband and drove it into his side. Gregory froze, a sharp, shuddering inhale. For the first time, real shock crossed his face. Eleanor twisted the knife, voice steady. "You don't own me anymore." Gregory staggered back, blood blooming through his shirt. He clutched his side, teeth clenched, rage simmering behind his eyes. But Eleanor saw something else too. Fear, because he had never expected her to fight back. He had spent years breaking her down, years making her question herself. But the moment she had woken up, his power over her had ended. Gregory's breath came ragged, but he forced a smirk. "You think this is over?" Eleanor wiped the blood off the blade unshaken. "It is for you." The sound of sirens filled the distance. Lena had done her part. Gregory's smirk faltered. Eleanor stepped forward, watching as realization finally set in. The house, the money, the power. It was all gone, and so was she. Eleanor leaned in, whispering the last words Gregory Lancaster would ever hear as a free man. Checkmate. Then she turned and walked away, leaving him bleeding. Epilogue: The Woman Who Lived. 1 month later, the world had changed. Gregory Lancaster was on trial, his empire dismantled, his influence shredded. The truth had spread far beyond what even Eleanor had expected. Project Phoenix, the experiments, the victims, her. She had been a pawn once, but not anymore. Eleanor stood on a quiet balcony, free in a way she had never been before. The scars of Gregory's manipulation still lingered, but they no longer controlled her. She was more than what he had tried to make her: a survivor, a fighter, a woman who had faced the monster behind the curtain, and won. Lena stepped beside her, sipping a drink. "So, what now?" Eleanor smiled. "Now?" She exhaled, watching the sunrise. "I start over, because for the first time in years, her life was hers, and no one would ever take it again." The end. Thank you for listening to Vault 386. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss what comes next. More stories are waiting, more secrets to uncover, and who knows, the next one might be even closer than you think. Until next time, stay curious, stay cautious, and keep listening.